Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my October 2025 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to skip over anything or go back to anything, all of that is down below. While you're checking that out down in the description, you can also make sure that you're subscribed because sometimes YouTube likes to unsubscribe people just for funsies, and why not hit that like notification while you're there? It's just efficient, really. As a reminder, at the end I will talk about my bingo board from hell as well as my prompts for Read Queer all year, and I did finish all of the prompts that I set out to do for Scubathon, so like, it was a good month. And because I've talked about most of these books before, some of them I've finished this week so I won't talk about until Sunday, I'm going to try to speed run some of this, but I always say that and then this video is still always really long. In October I read 21 books for a total of 6,115 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 3,193 of those pages were actually about 93 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 16 adult books, 3 middle grade books, and 2 YA books. I read 14 novels, 4 anthologies, and 3 graphic novels. This month the biggest chunk of what I read was horror, fantasy, and nonfiction, followed by historical fiction, contemporary fiction, romance, and mystery thriller. If you adjust by page count, horror ran longer than nonfiction. Almost all of these books were from the library, but I did read 2 that were purchased. I read 9 audiobooks, 8 paperbacks, and 4 hardcovers. Most of my books were in the 200 to 399 page range, and nearly half were backlist titles. When it comes to the genders of authors, it was overwhelmingly women, although things were more mixed when it came to the genders of protagonists. In terms of setting, just over half were set in the US, but I also had books set in the UK, other worlds, Canada, France, Japan, and Argentina. In terms of diversity of subject matter, about half were queer, a chunk were translated, some were intersectional, whereas others had to do with race, disability, or feminism. In terms of star ratings this month, I had 3 3-star reads, 2 3.5-star reads, 5 4-star reads, 5 4.5-star reads, and 6 5-star reads. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? First, in the 3-star category, we have Herculine Barbin. This was actually a book that I picked up primarily for my 40 before 40 TBR, but also it's something I've been meaning to read for quite some time because it is an example of somebody who is intersex writing about that experience in the 1800s. That's basically all I knew when I knew that I wanted to eventually pick this up. I actually acquired a copy quite a long time ago because my library doesn't have a copy, and I was just kind of waiting around to actually get around to reading it. This is translated from French as this person grew up and lived in France, and the story about how somebody came to have these memoirs of a sort is a little bit weird. This book is split up into a few different sections. First we have an introduction from somebody, then we have the memoirs as they exist, because not all of them still exist. Then we have a collection of documents having to do with this person, and then at the end of this there was also a German short story that was inspired by the life of this person, and I didn't bother reading that because I just assumed it was going to be sensationalized based on what I knew about this person. Also, I just quite honestly don't know how to refer to this person, so I'm just going to keep saying this person, and I'm defaulting to the neutral they when I'm talking about them because I don't know how they would actually like to be referred as. So the biggest chunk of this book was that memoir section, and from my understanding of reading the introduction and the bits after this, it is my understanding that there was much more to this memoir and then it was just kind of shortened and we only have what was published by this certain doctor who got the memoirs from the person who found the body, and by found the body I mean this person did take their own life. And then the attending doctor basically went, well, their note says that they have these dire circumstances, but nobody in their life seems to know anything about these dire circumstances, so I have a theory that they must have had syphilis, so let's check the genitals, and upon checking the genitals realize that they are different than the usual binary genders. This doctor then went on to get permission from the courts, not necessarily the family, to do experiments on the body and do all of these other things and write about it, and this just doesn't feel ethical to me. And then it's based on these findings how much of the memoir section that was found in the flat where this person's body was published, and we don't have the rest of it. And in the memoir itself, the character is referring to themselves as Camille, even though that's not a name this person ever used in life, so it's just kind of like, is this fiction that was loosely based on this person's life, We don't know. All in all, I basically just had so many conflicted feelings about this book, and I really wanted to know more about this person's experience, and I feel like a lot of the salacious details were left in, and a lot more of the actual experience of being intersex was kind of left by the wayside. We did get to see sections where this person was socialized as female and then later transitioned to male and had to go through the courts to get that changed. And then we also saw how suddenly being classified as male was difficult because they didn't have any work experience that a man would have, so getting employment was difficult because you can't just tell your employer that you used to be a lady's maid. I'm glad we have this example from the 1800s. I just am feeling so weird about the ethics around all of it. Next we have when Katie met Cassidy, this about a woman named Katie who recently had her fiance break up with her because her fiance is now with her best friend. And she goes to work one day as a lawyer, and across the table from her on the opposite side is this woman who she originally thought was a man and then realized was actually a woman, and then realized she's actually attracted to her, and it's like, hey, I've never been attracted to a woman before. This is new and interesting, and it becomes a romance between these two characters. What I love about this is there were a lot of queer women characters in it. That was wonderful. What I didn't love is not a single one of them thought, hey, Katie might be bisexual. Everybody just referred to her as that straight girl that Camille is trying to get in bed or things like that, and I was just like, can we not be biphobic? Like, can we just use that word at least once? I'm not saying this character has to identify as bi. In fact, if this character has a realization that she is in fact a lesbian, that's great for her. But at a point like this, where you've only ever dated men, and you've only ever been attracted to men, and now suddenly you're attracted to a woman, that word should be somewhere in the discussion. This was okay. There were sections of it that were a little bit like, excuse me, what are these characters doing? But it was fine, I guess, if you look over the biphobia, which is honestly why I couldn't score this any higher. Next, we have a book that I should have loved, but the writing was just not for me, and that was Hamnet. At the beginning of this book, you're told 3 facts. 1, Shakespeare used to be a dude. 2, he had a son who died when the son was 11. And 3, 4 years after that, he wrote Hamlet. This one has a dual timeline. 1, when Hamnet is 11, so we know he's not too long for this world, especially because he's running around trying to find a doctor because his twin sister Judith is not doing too well. And right from that point, I was like, oh, I bet he's going to get the plague that she has, she's going to survive, and he's going to die, and it's going to be a whole big thing. And spoiler for something that happened in the 1500s, yes. The other timeline is about 15, 16 years previous to this, and it has to do with someone we only ever refer to as the Latin tutor, or later Agnes's husband, courting this woman named Agnes. These, of course, are Hamnet's parents. Now, being a book about Shakespeare and me being a big theater nerd, you would think that I would be really, really into this, and I thought I was going to be really, really into this. However, the writing in this just got on my nerves. Firstly, half the time, the writing would be talking about a conversation that happened, but it wouldn't reproduce that conversation. It would just kind of say the words that were said in the text without any quotation marks, and then there'd be a comma, and you wouldn't know if that next section was something that was said or just something the narrative is telling you, and that was endlessly annoying. Additionally, this author loves to just randomly list things, which can be great, but not every paragraph. And there was one section in particular that really bothered me. I'm going to see if I can find it. Here's a line that was at the beginning of a section. The lines and lines of apples were moving, jolting, rocking on their shelves. Now to me, that was enough to know that 2 people are in the apple storage shed and they're doing it in there. However, you then get another page and a half of what this kestrel with a hood on can hear and smell while these people are doing it. And I'm like, I understand what's happening. You don't have to give me a page and a half of descriptions of exactly how the apples moved and exactly what it smelled like, because one of the apples fell on the ground and the Latin teacher must have stepped on it so I can smell the apple even better. And I'm like, for the love of God, I do not have time for this. So yeah, the writing was not for me. Let's move on. On to my 3.5 star reads, the first one being the life-changing manga of tidying up. Now I want to point out that for a woman who's like, I personally only ever need 20 books in my house at any time, the fact that this woman is writing the same book over and over and over again in different formats is a little bit annoying to me. That being said, revisiting this book as a manga was actually kind of fun because I did read the original book back in the day and I thought some of the tips were kind of great, and this one you actually got diagrams of how to roll things. So I've actually started folding my t-shirts the way that she suggested, and I like this. It was also really fun to see somebody going through her method and how that actually affected that person's life. That was kind of fun. But yeah, that one spread that was all like, how would you like to be in a room full of books that you never read? I was like, I would love that, actually. I don't know what's wrong with you, Marie Kondo. My other 3.5 star read was The Titan's Curse, which is the 3rd book in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. Being the 3rd book, not too much I can tell you because I don't want to spoil things in the first 2 books. However, I can tell you that that my major criticism when I got to the second book was how formulaic it was and how the opening was basically the exact same as the first book. And that didn't happen in this one, so I'm delighted by that. Also, my best friend has been telling me that I was going to love a character that finally shows up in this book, and so far I do really love Nico. I am looking way forward into the series, and by series I mean the wider universe, when I know Marco Shiro writes at least one book with this character, because I really like Marco Shiro, so I'm excited to see what they do with this character. All of that being said, it's another big adventure, because of course it is, and of course I have a hold on the next one, because I am planning to at least read this section of the series. I don't know if I'll read all 25-ish books, but I'll at least finish this series. And then maybe read some more because there is a quest on Pagebound. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being a graphic novel called A Song for You and I by Kay O'Neill. This one is about this person who is a ranger, which means that they are basically somebody who keeps villages safe. And to do this, they actually have a flying horse, and they're responsible for the health of this flying horse. They're kind of bonded to this flying horse for their lifetime. And they are getting closer and closer to this kind of naming ceremony where you get to write your name on this arch and it proves that you are in fact a rider. But before that ceremony can happen, everyone has these assignments, and they got kind of the easiest one, which they're upset about because they don't feel like they're going to be able to prove themselves by just sitting around and watching some sheep and watching a farmer who spends more time fiddling than watching their sheep. However, a few things happen. They have to get to know this farmer a little bit better, and things go from there. This is sweet and wholesome. It was something I really enjoyed just finishing one night before I went to bed. And as always, Kay O'Neill's illustrations are just absolutely stunning. Next, in a very big tone shift, we have Paperbacks from Hell. This is a very big informational book about these classic paperbacks between the 70s and 90s. You know, the horror ones that had like the cutouts on the cover or just these amazing illustrations on them that were just disgusting. And then of course about what's inside those covers and talking about some of the plots and some of the things I never thought I'd read about being in one of these books. Although I did read a fair amount of horror growing up, I did read a bunch of King, a little bit of Kuntz, a lot of Pike, some V.C. Andrews, and obviously some Stein. There are other very well-known titles, or at least well-known in this time frame, that I didn't read, so I now have a personal challenge to eventually get around to those. However, one of the more modern horror books I read this month is Tender is the Flesh. This one is about cannibalism. These characters live in a time frame where you can no longer eat the flesh of animals because there's been some kind of disease for all the animals. So society has moved on to eating special meat, which is humans that are bred for the purpose of eating. Yes, it's disgusting. Yes, I'm glad I was already vegan going into this for over a decade. And I made a lot of really weird faces while reading this in public, so that's a thing. Also, this was only going to end one of two ways, so have fun if you ever read it. Next, we have a book from the 70s, and that is Fade Out. This is the first in a detective series with this detective who is an insurance investigator and gay, which is only notable because these books were published in the 70s, back when 49 out of the 50 states were like, no, you can't be that. In this book, there's somebody who seems to probably have died, except for there is no body, so Dave has gone out to try to figure out what might have happened to that body, because obviously his company is not going to pay out the life insurance until they can prove that the person is actually dead. From this standpoint, Dave is trying to figure out, one, if the person is actually dead, and two, what happened here. We also get to see some things from his personal life. For example, he did have a partner and then there was sort of a breakup, but it's kind of ambiguous, and that partner is now deceased. So obviously there's a lot of grief there. And there's this one section of this book that I really didn't like, which is that there's this young character that shows up. I don't even know if he's 18 yet, and is basically like, Dave, I've had a crush on you since I was 11. I really want to be with you. And Dave's like, no, that's inappropriate. But then he comes back near the end of the book and he's there again, and it's not my favorite thing to read, so I just really hope, if I read any more books in this series, which I'm hopefully planning to if I get my hands on them, that character just doesn't exist anymore, because I don't need that. When it comes to the detective part of this book, I really enjoyed it. When it came to that part, I was like, no. As for a more modern mystery, I read Delicious Monsters. This one takes place around 2 different locations in Canada, Toronto and Timmins, and then just outside Timmins, because there's a lake house situation. This one has a dual timeline. The first timeline is Daisy. Growing up, it's just been her and her mother, and she occasionally talks to her dad on weekends, but they haven't really seen each other in about 10 years, and he was never really in the picture. And her whole life, her mom has been working towards one day maybe inheriting this lake house. And that day has finally come, and she has to make the decision if they're actually going to go to this house, which it turns out is enormous. So enormous, in fact, that there's a guest house next to it, and that's actually where they're going to live because her mom wants the other place to be an Airbnb, and she's never allowed to go into that house, and she's never told why, and her dad doesn't want her to move there but won't tell her why. And other people that live in the area seem to know something is wrong with this house, but nobody will tell her why. The other perspective is a girl named Brittany. She's about 10 years in the future from this timeline, and she co-hosts a ghosty podcast with her friend. Her friend really believes in ghosts, and she's kind of the person that's like, ghosts aren't real, what are you talking about? And she actually has a personal connection to this house because her mom, about 8 years ago, went and stayed in this house and had a transformative experience and then wrote a best-selling book about how she became a better person after going to this house, which Brittany knows to be false because her mom is still a narcissist who is constantly like, if you don't do good things, my book won't keep selling and then I won't have money to co-sign your loans on where you live in Toronto. But her and her partner have to go to this area to kind of try to figure out what might have happened with Daisy 10 years previously. I really, really enjoyed this. I really liked this dual timeline. I really wanted to know what happened with Daisy because it comes to a point where we don't know who died, but we know somebody died and it was more than one person. I just feel like this was told really, really well, and I very much enjoyed it. On to my 4.5-star reads, the first one being The Curse of Eelgrass Bog. This is a middle grade book about this character who lives in this house next to this place called Eelgrass Bog, and it's just her and her slightly older brother, and they're waiting for their parents to return because they went off to Antarctica to do something with the unnatural history of that area because they live in and run an unnatural history museum. However, while they're gone, she kind of feels like the place is falling apart a little bit, and she keeps going into Eelgrass Bog to see if she can find different bog mummies or anything like that that they can put into the museum so more people would come to the museum so it doesn't fall apart while her parents are gone. One day, for the first time in what feels like forever, they actually get a visitor, and it's somebody her own age, and she actually has specific questions about Eelgrass Bog because it turns out that her grandfather used to live here, and when he passed, he kind of left a mystery for her to solve, and they decide to try to solve it together. That's all I can really tell you without telling you too much and giving too much away. I really enjoyed this. It was a very complex little mystery story. And because it is for an audience range that is younger than me, I feel like I got some of the things that were happening a little bit ahead of time of maybe the intended audience, but that did not detract from my enjoyment whatsoever. In fact, I had theories going that were wildly off base, and I was happy they were off base, to be clear. Another middle grade book I read this month is Just Lizzie. This is about a character named Lizzie, whose family recently had to move into a different house because in her old neighborhood, the neighborhood where she's grown up her entire life, something scary happened with one of the neighbors, and instead of him having to leave his house, they had to leave their house, and she feels that's completely unfair. In addition to that, her older brother has just gone off to university, and they are very, very close, so this is very tough for her. And she's got this best friend who recently started dating and is boy obsessed and keeps asking the question, what do you mean you don't have a crush on anyone? You have to have a crush on someone. Even if it's a girl, I don't mind if it's a girl, but you have to have a crush on someone. And as this book goes on, this character comes to realize that there's a word for what they are, and it's asexual. There's something about middle grade books where these characters are going through all of these things to do with really big feelings that really just gets me right in the heart and makes me feel these really big feelings that these characters are feeling, and I'm not gonna lie, I shed some tears while listening to this. Lizzie's just going through a lot, and sometimes people are really mean to her, and sometimes people just need to back off, okay? Another book I listened to this month is The Moment of Lift. This is a nonfiction book by Melinda Gates, and it has to do with the Gates Foundation, and it's a little bit of a memoir, and it's a little bit of what we can do to better the world. This book really talked a lot about how humans tend to create outsiders and then look down on those outsiders, and how society as a whole would be better if we just brought those people from the margins of society into society and treated them like the humans that they are. There was a lot of insight in this, and what I really enjoyed is she told the story of a lot of different people, not just telling her own story. Because obviously anyone can tell their own story, but she is at a very privileged position, and I like that she used her privilege to divulge the stories of other people who consented to that happening. Next, we have a book called Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. This one is about a woman who recently broke up with her boyfriend, and she is now in a new town because she's going to be teaching at this new university. And she goes to the farmer's market one day, and there's this woman there selling soaps and plants, and she realizes that she kind of has a crush on her. And she's like, wait, this has never really happened for me before. I didn't realize this about myself, but, you know, maybe I also like women, which is neat. Let's see where this goes. And she spends a decent amount of time just trying to figure out if she's going to befriend this woman or if there's going to be a little bit more and what's this woman's deal. And little things that make her feel special or don't. But there's this insidious undertone to certain things that happen. And it seems like there are red flags that are easily explained away because you just really want this situation to work out. And that's where I'm going to leave you because I want you to figure out what's going on. Is it insidious or is it perfectly sweet and fine? Read this book to find out. As for a situation that's definitely not fine, I also read Hex. This is about a small town, I believe in upstate New York, where for the last 350 years they've been haunted by this witch who was put to death but never left. This witch actually wanders around the town and randomly shows up in people's houses to the point where they actually have an app to track her movements. People from outside of this town are not allowed to know about the witch, and if you move into this town and the witch shows herself to you, you are now under the curse, which means that you can't really leave the town for too long. Otherwise, you will start feeling this incredible urge to unsubscribe from the situation. Which is my new favorite term for something YouTube doesn't like people saying, even though it's a fact of life. Follow a wide variety of points of view in this book, and it gets very creepy at points, and you can see what certain characters are trying to do, and you can see other characters where you're like, please don't do that. Why would you do that? No, no, oh, no, the bad things are happening now. This was so creepy and incredibly weird and such an interesting concept, and I really enjoyed it. On to my 5-star reads, the first one being Fangs by Sarah Anderson. You probably know this author because she is Sarah's Scribbles. She does those very awesome comics that you've probably seen everywhere. If it's a 4 or 5 panel work that's in black and white, and it really has to do with this very odd character who is introverted and likes cats, you've probably seen her stuff before. This is drawn in a completely different style, and it's about a werewolf and a vampire falling in love and what that looks like. And it's written in just these little vignettes of situations they find themselves in, and I loved it. From the very first panel, I was already cackling to myself because there was something incredibly witty on it, and then every single one of these situations that these two characters found themselves in, I was just like, this makes so much sense, or I was laughing really hard. Next, on the nonfiction side of things, we have Outrage by Ellen Jones. This is all about why the fight for LGBTQ+ equality is not yet won and what we can do about it. This one is primarily focused on the UK because that's where Ellen is, but it does have statistics from outside of the UK, and there is so much in this that I got so angry about. Because people like to say, we have marriage equality, but that is not actually accurate. And it's especially infuriating that people feel like, oh, queer people can get married now, everything's equal, so they've kind of put everything else out of their minds, and it turns out that, one, marriage equality isn't actually a thing. Read this book to find out more about that, because I'm just gonna get really angry and up my blood pressure if I talk about it. But two, because of this random marker, they've gone, oh yeah, no, we don't need to care about the equality anymore, because like, obviously it's already dealt and done with. You have so many privileges, you have so many rights, it's totally fine, when no, people are still persecuted, especially when it comes to the trans community, who is currently everyone's punching bag, and I just need everyone to leave trans people alone. Ellen, of course, put everything that I want to say much more eloquently than I did, and I highly recommend you pick up this book. No matter where you live, there's information in this that you need to know. Next, we have Don't Let the Forest In. This concerns a character who is going back for his last year of high school. He's actually from Australia, but his dad came into some money while he and his twin sister were in their teens, and he works a lot, so they're actually going to this boarding school in America. So he and his sister arrive back at this school. We know something happened the previous year that wasn't great. He's really nervous because he and his twin sister have this mutual best friend who he hasn't really talked to over the summer because he knows that the friend's phone got broken and his parents didn't have the money to get him a new one. So he doesn't know if this friend is okay, and he worries about him a lot, especially because he also has a crush on him. As we get into the story, we find out that something happened back home to the friend's parents recently, like after he left to go to school, and the police show up, and now people on the campus are thinking that maybe he had something to do with his parents' disappearance, and they're having to try to solve this, but also weird and creepy things start happening at the school itself, and they have to figure out why and to stop it. It turns out that they used to always go into the forest. It was the place they liked to be, and now they're suddenly told this year you're not allowed to go into the forest. And that poses some problems because the forest is in fact trying to encroach into this school with its evil influences. This one threw me for a loop several times. I very much enjoyed my reading experience of it. This next one, I also enjoyed my reading experience of it, but I also finished this book sobbing on my bedroom floor, so take that as you will, and that was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This one is a historical fiction about this woman who is teaching physics when her sister tells her that they're actually going to be letting women into the astronaut corps. She applies but doesn't get in the first round, but in the second round she applies again and is accepted to train. This is absolutely huge information. And because she's going through this experience, we get to see her also going through this experience and seeing just what that's like, which was just absolutely fascinating. We also see there's this kind of competition, not only with the other people in your group, but within the thought that women have to prove themselves that much more. And then some of the women want to be the first woman. They figure if any of the women do anything potentially wrong, then it looks bad on all the women, which is just a fact that happens, unfortunately. But then, of course, this book is not all work and no play, because this main character also has a sister with a young daughter who she spends a lot of time with because she's honestly a better mother figure than the actual mother. And there's this person at work that kind of keeps catching her eye. This book was absolutely brilliant. I very much enjoyed it, and like I said, I finished it while sobbing on my bedroom floor. So if that is not an indication that this book is so good you need to read it, then I don't know what is. For these last two books, I had a really hard time picking the order, and then eventually I just had to pick an order because I can't talk about them at the same time because they're not anything like each other. So my penultimate book on this list is Her Majesty's Royal Coven. This is the first in a trilogy, although I believe it also has a prequel. And this book ended in such a way where I was so happy the trilogy is already published, and I immediately put a hold on the second book, which I have not gotten to yet because the hold hasn't come in, but you better believe that I am very excited to see how the situation plays out. Hello, a blink of an eye for you was like 45 minutes for me while I let my camera battery charge because it ran out of battery because I was talking so much. So at the beginning of this book we meet 5 girls, and they are all about to be initiated into the same coven. They've kind of grown up together, and they've kind of grown up together in the 90s, so they often associate themselves with one of the 5 Spice Girls. And as we come to find out, certain Spice Girls were sometimes thrust upon them when they didn't want to be that Spice Girl. The majority of this book, after this epilogue section, takes place much later when they're all adults. And we know that previous to this timeline there has been some form of war, because every once in a while somebody with magical abilities realizes they could probably use those abilities to rule the world, and they try to do that, and then they have to be stopped. And that's exactly what happened a little while ago, and at this point we only see 4 out of those 5 girls, and we don't really know what happened to the 5th one, but you do come to find that out. One of these women is now the lead of the coven they were initiated into, and it's basically the governing body for the covens in the UK. Another one quit the coven quite a while ago, another one started her own coven specifically for BIPOC witches, and then the 4th character also left the coven after the war, and she's working as a veterinarian, but she still uses her magic sometimes to do certain things. One of the things that she used to do when she worked for Her Majesty's Royal Coven was help witches that were found really late in life and kind of habituate them to the witch lifestyle. A child of extraordinary power is found, but there's also a prophecy around this time that a child is going to bring a lot of doom, so the person that's at the lead of the coven thinks that this child is going to be a bad time, and then the one that's now a veterinarian kind of comes back on kind of a freelance basis to kind of help this kid out. That's basically what I can tell you without spoiling too much about this, because this book ends in such a way where my mouth literally dropped open. I was like, what do you mean you're gonna end a book this way? What do you mean I'm not reading this next one immediately? There's a lot of very political and sociological topics that come up in this book. There's a lot of discussions about certain things. One of the characters is definitely a TERF. So yeah, there's a lot in this, and I very much enjoyed my time with it. And like I said, I cannot believe what happens at the end, and I'm going to have to read the next one so quickly when it comes in. The final book on this list is The September House. This one is about a woman named Margaret. She and her husband always dreamed about having a certain type of house, but when they were younger and starting a family, they didn't really have the money for something big and extravagant. But now that she's a little bit older, her daughter's gone off to university and is now in the professional world, she sees this listing for a house and it seems absolutely perfect. So her and her husband decide to go for a tour of the house because why not? And they both fall in love with it. All of this is in this epilogue where they're kind of ignoring these little red flags as the realtor's talking about, well, I legally have to tell you there was at least one death in the house. And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. It's an old house. I'm sure that there's been a few deaths here. Whatever, it happens. And there's such a beautiful tonal switch between this epilogue and the first line of the first chapter, which I will spoil for you right now. If you want to skip ahead 10 seconds, you totally can. But the first line of the first chapter is basically, well, the walls are bleeding again. We're now 3.5 years in the future, and we find out that every September, this house is very haunted. It's haunted through the rest of the year, but in September specifically is when all of the ghosts really come out to play. And certain ghosts move things around, the walls start bleeding. It's just not a really good time, but she's survived the past 3 Septembers, so this 4th September should be fine. Sure, the last one kind of sucked near the end, but she got through it. However, her husband has decided he is not spending another September here, and he's already left. And her daughter keeps calling and being like, I haven't talked to Dad recently, and she finally has to tell her daughter, he left, I don't know where he is, he hasn't contacted me since the beginning of August. This throws her daughter into a panic, and she's like, Mom, I'm coming to the house, we have to find Dad. And she doesn't really want her daughter to come to the house because she's never come to the house, and coming to the house in September when it's super haunted doesn't seem like a really good idea. But she can't stop her daughter from arriving, so now they have to figure out what happened to her husband. At the same time, she's trying to make sure that her daughter is not affected by the haunting. That already is completely wild, but then once you kind of get an idea as to why she doesn't want to leave this house, because it is her house, so why should she have to leave? I understand that completely, but there's more layers of complexity to that I found really enriched this book. And there's certain areas of this book where suddenly you're thinking about what's going on changes, and then it changes again, and it just keeps evolving, and I just really enjoyed it. This book talks about so many different things. For all of the books that I ever talk about, please make sure to check out trigger warnings ahead of time, because I'm always afraid I'm going to miss something, therefore I don't list them so I can't miss anything. But I always have a couple of links down below where you can check out trigger warnings for books, so that's always down below for you. Needless to say, I absolutely adored this. When it comes to the prompts for Read Queer All Year, this is what that bingo board looked like, and I filled out all of the prompts. For LGBTQ history, I read Outrage. For a book about coming out, I read When Katie Met Cassidy. For creepy queers, I read Bloom. And for intersex rep, I read Herculine Barbin. All of those books, except for When Katie Met Cassidy, also counted for prompts for Scubathon, and then the other prompts were covered by Fade Out and Hamnet. As for my bingo board from hell, this is what it looks like, and I got another stamp on it. So I've already had a stamp in the first corner for a while because banned books, I've read 14 of them now. But I got a stamp for the Readathon square. I also read a couple of more books for my 40 before 40 TBR, so that has gone up, but it hasn't reached the 15 I need if I want to cross that off. And I read 3 more translated books, but I had already crossed off that square, so that's just extra. I can also tell you that I've actually been waiting to read my book for the emoji square in November because it comes out in November and I have an arc, so I'm going to have a bingo next month. And that feels really, really good because for the longest time I've been feeling like I'm not going to cross off enough on this board and I'm going to be personally very upset with myself. So the fact that I'm going to get a bingo is just very much whew. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. Have you read any of these books, or do you now want to read any of these books? Let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!